21 days, about 22 days ago, I was on Spotify, and I have a long commute every day. So my commute is almost an hour one way every day. So I'm in the car for about 10 hours a week. And so I like to listen to different podcasts, and I had really recently got hooked on a guy named Dallas Willard. So I don't know if you've ever heard of him. Dallas Willard was a spiritual giant. He passed away recently. He's written lots and lots of books. He is smart. And so I wanted to hear some Dallas Willard stuff on Spotify. And so I was looking on Spotify for Dallas Willard, just searching for that, and it popped up this one interview. And the title of it just said this, The Next Right Thing, by this woman, Emily Freeman, and she was just talking about Dallas Willard. And so I thought, oh, that's interesting. And so it was only less than 10 minutes long. And so I put it on and started driving. And by the time those 10 minutes were over, I was so profoundly moved by what I heard that I actually rewound it and listened to it again, and then rewound it and listened to it again. I listened to it 8 times in the first 24 hours. I've never done anything like that, but I was so impacted by what I heard, and then immediately sent it to all of my kids and said, kids, you have to listen to this. And in the episode by this woman I've never heard of, but she was talking about a quote, 6 words that Dallas Willard had said once. And I'd never heard these 6 words this way before, and was so overwhelmed by it that I immediately knew I wanted to make these 6 words kind of the foundation for the rest of my life. That's how much they impacted me. I wanted to make them the foundation for the rest of my life. I've used these 6 words over and over again in the last 3 weeks. Can't even tell you how many times. Primarily when I hear bad news. Something bad happens immediately. I have these 6 words in my mind. And like I said, it's what I want to live out for the rest of my life. So you may be wondering, well, what were those 6 words you heard that day? Well, here's what I want to ask you to do first. Would you open your program, take out the notes that you'll find inside, grab a pen, and of course, if you're watching online, go to our website, open up the link for these notes and grab it. And at the top, I have this big long line, and here are the 6 words that have begun to change my whole life. Never believe anything bad about God. Never believe anything bad about God. Now, some of you may be like, really, Brian? Isn't that kind of like a duh? But the truth is, when I heard them, and I heard this description, I immediately knew that many times in my life I have believed bad things about God. Not only have I done this, I've watched other people do it with terrible consequences. I was reading a blog recently from a woman named Sarah. She looks like she's maybe early 30s. And she was a Christian. She was a follower of Jesus. Today she calls herself an agnostic. And on one of her blog pages, she details the steps she went from believing in Jesus to not believing in him anymore. And she said the critical transition point happened right after college. She was in this dating relationship with a boy for 2.5 years, and it wasn't a good relationship. And yet, here's what she said, and this, she said, was the key factor why she doesn't believe in Jesus anymore. She said, I believed it had been confirmed to me for certain by God that this individual was the person God wanted me to marry. This toxic individual. And so the decision point for her life became this: I obey God and stay in a toxic relationship that she described as bad for her mental health, or I disobey God and break up with this sick relationship. Does anyone else see a problem with this? She believed something really bad about God. Because how many of you actually think that God was in heaven saying, oh, listen here, Sarah, you stay with that sicko. You got to stay there. I mean, does anyone actually think? But she believed it. She believed this bad thing about God. And so when she finally did the right thing and broke up the relationship with her faith fell apart too. Because the God that she believed in was an evil God who wanted her to be in a bad relationship with someone. Isn't that crazy? Anytime you allow yourself to believe something bad about God, your faith is always affected. Always. So a starting point question for all of you today is literally this one. How's your faith today? How's your faith today? If I were to ask you to put a word to it, or more than one word, what word would come to mind? Would it be, my faith is strong today, or growing today, or fulfilling? Or would you use words like struggling, confusing, God feels distant? And all of this, quite honestly, feels a little bit irrelevant. Which list would you be more inclined to point toward? What if the problem lies in what we believe about God? I want to show you that today. We're in the series that I told you we started last week called Refinery Sessions. You know what a refinery is. You take something that's kind of its raw form and you refine it, you make it better, purer, stronger. And in my life, over the last 6 months, God has been refining me in some pretty significant ways. So I told you last week, this is kind of my personal therapy in front of all of you. Things that God has been walking me through, I just want to talk about it with you. And I really want to talk to you about this one today because I think it is a key, really, how to hold on to your faith no matter what comes. I think that's what this will do for you. So I want to talk about this, and just two things for today. First thing is, if you're going to do this, you have to decide what you actually believe about God. And I wish that somebody could get a hold of Sarah and talk to her about this very thing. I wish somebody would send her the link to that podcast. Because what you believe, whatever you believe, is impacting your life in any area of your life. Matter of fact, did you know when the bicycle was first invented and started gaining popularity in America, there were warnings that were issued by doctors to say, don't ride a bike. Did you know this? Because of something they called bicycle face. I'm not making this up. You can look it up. Bicycle face. Oh, yeah. And the warning was particular to women. As one of the doctors had written, and I read this, that you will have all of these symptoms of bicycle face if you start riding a bike, including anxious look, unwholesome pallor, clenched jaw, bulging eyes, and your face can stay that way. And so there were women who literally were afraid to get on a bicycle because they didn't want to develop bicycle face. And what they believe impacted what they did, right? I'm not getting on a bike because I believe that it will transform my face into bicycle face. I love another quote from Dallas Willard. We always live according to what we believe. We just don't always live according to what we profess we believe. You know how many times I've met Christians who would say, I believe in the power of prayer. Well, did you pray at all this last week? Not really, no. We always live according to what we believe. You can always tell. So the key question here we have to wrestle with is this. What do I really believe about God? That is the key question, and I need you to think about that today. Because it's affecting every part of your life spiritually. What do you really believe about God? And this is where I was so deeply challenged by that podcast, because she made me think about God and she gave a bunch of descriptions. So if you wouldn't mind, would you flip your notes over in the back? There are 14 different descriptions of God on this, and several of them come right from the podcast. And what I want you to do is take a pen, and I'm going to give you just a moment, and I want you to read through these and put an X by any of them that you have ever been tempted to believe. By the way, do you know what a carnival barker is? You'll see that. It's the carnival person that would stand in the midway with 3 cups, and you put a ball under one, and you rotate around. It's like, all right, guess, which one is it? So that's the idea of that one. So I wanted to explain that. But go ahead, take a minute. I'm going to give you a minute, and you go ahead and put an X by any of these that you have ever been tempted to believe about God. When I did this exercise and I took some of the list from her podcast and then I added a whole bunch of other ones that I've seen, there were 5 that I put an X mark by. that at different times in my spiritual journey I've believed. And I think the one that hurt me the most was the fourth one down, an indifferent stranger, uncaring, uninterested, and unconcerned with my well-being. The day I believed that, my faith fell apart. Your faith is always affected by what you believe about God. So the question is, what do we actually believe about God? I think part of why that podcast hit me so hard 3 weeks ago is because shortly before that, if you were here in September, we did a series called Mistaken Identity. And we were talking about who we actually are, who Jesus makes us to be at the moment we believe in him. The very first message in that series was a message that I just loved. And it was, you become his child, his son or daughter. And I told in that message the story of the prodigal son, which I've talked about dozens of times in my career. Dozens of times I've talked about this story. But there was an aspect of it that I saw in the story that day that impacted me significantly, and I think that the podcast tied into it. Because you have to understand, and again, for those who weren't here that day, Jesus tells this story, and the intent of the story is to show what God the Father is really like. So if you checked any of those on the back, then that story is really Jesus' attempt to show you what the Father is really like. And he tells this story with this huge extreme, with this father with two boys, and one of the boys said, "Dad, I don't want to wait till you die in order to have my inheritance. I want it now." And so the father gives it to him, which was such an offensive thing to say. And then he goes off and he lives an immoral life. What Jews would never do, this boy does, and ruins his life. At the end of this path that he's on, he is penniless, he is starving, he's destitute, and he is sitting there feeding pigs, which again, everything in the story is intended to communicate how much he has done wrong. I mean, for a Jew, these were just so offensive. And so, all of a sudden one day as he's sitting there looking at what the pigs are eating, realizes it dawns on him, he's like, oh my goodness, even the worst servant at my dad's house is living better than I'm living. And so it says the son made up his mind that he was going to return to his dad. And this, of course, for the Jewish audience would have been scandalous too. It's like, now you want to come home? But he says, I'm just going to go back and ask my dad to make me a servant. And the Jews were listening to Jesus, they would have thought that in that moment when the dad saw the boy, that he said something like this, right? I guess I'll take you back. Yeah, you can be a servant, go wash some dishes. Or, you embarrass me. Or, I'm so ashamed of you. Those would have been a natural response to what the boy had done. That was a natural response. And instead, incredibly, the father in the story, who is God our Father, responds completely different. It says, while the boy was still a long way off, the dad saw him and the dad ran, which again, that you just don't do this in society like that. But he was so excited to see his boy, he ran to him. And the boy starts his little speech, and the dad interrupts him, and he turns to the servants, and he says, the father said to the servants, quick, bring the finest robe in the house and put it on him, and get a ring for his finger and sandals for his feet, and kill the calf we've been fattening. We must celebrate with a feast, for the son of mine was dead, and now he has returned to life. He was lost, but now he is found, and the party began. And everyone listening to this 2,000 years ago, their jaws were, oh, are you kidding me? That's how this story goes? And remember the intent of it. Jesus is trying to show what the heart of the Father is really like. All of these descriptions of what you may think God is like, this is what God is like. This is what God is like. That he is willing to say to us at any moment that we turn to him, I am so thrilled you came to me. Because I love you just as you are, and you are always welcome with me. And this is forgiven. And I'm not ashamed of you. All I want to do is restore you. And that restore word was what hit me so powerfully a month ago. Because the rest of the story, the whole story is about the restoration of the Son. The moment he turned back to the Father, this is the heart of God. He just wants to restore us. Bring the finest robe, restore his clothing, put a ring back on his finger, restore his position in the family, sandals for his feet, light the grill, because we have to celebrate. And oh, by the way, you are the guest of honor. There's no part of that any person hearing Jesus thought was about to happen. And Jesus said, this is what the Father's like. And this is his heart toward you at every moment of your life. Every moment of your life. You can't stop him from loving you. You can't stop him from wanting to be with you. And he only wants to restore you. Because we are, through faith in Jesus, his child. And he will always want to be with us. So the right image of God is this: indescribably strong, loving Father who cares about every single thing in my life. Now, that may sound cliche, or it may sound like something, Brian, I already know this, let's move on. Okay, but the right image of God is powerful because there's a part in the podcast that I've listened to, 30 or 40 times now. Every single time I get to what the implication of this means, it generates tremendous emotion in me. So I put it on the back of your notes. And this is directly from that author. Look at this. Here's what she said is the implication of all this. He, God, will not shame you, belittle you, or abuse you. He will not trick or tease you. He will not laugh at or make fun of you. He'll not talk about you behind your back, stab you in the back, or tell you to be more like your sister or brother. He'll not cheat on or betray you. His eyes are not narrowed at you. His ears are not closed to you. His nose is not turned up at you. His hands are not harsh with you. And you do not leave a bad taste in his mouth. That's what it means. His love for you is so completely overwhelming that all he wants at every moment of every day is time with you to restore you to the person he wants you to be. Is that what you believe about God? Now, it's easy to sit in a room like this and hear this and to say, okay, I believe that. It's hard to believe, right, that God would love you like this. But it's the point of Jesus' story. Jesus wants no doubt remaining that this is what the Father is really like. The challenge is the moment you leave. And what happens the moment you leave? The moment you leave is that we have to put this into practice, and the only way to do it is to respond with faith when you are tested. And this is really critical for many of you at this point in your life because of what you're going through. Respond with faith when you're tested. Because some of you are in the middle of some big tests right now, right? Some of you are in the middle of, you have suffered a huge loss. You have had an unexpected financial problem. You have gotten bad medical news. You have an unanswered prayer. And in the middle of that, all of a sudden this concept of God being loving and powerful feels kind of like an abstract idea. Something just Christians say, but it doesn't seem like it actually applies to our lives. It's like, well, why would we say that? And the question I've been wrestling with for the last 3 weeks, and this is a question for me, but I want to make it a question for you too. Why is it so easy for us to believe bad things about God? Why is that so easy? And it's not a new thing. Jesus' own disciples did it. Many of you are familiar with the story of Jesus and his disciples were on a boat in the Sea of Galilee, and Jesus had fallen asleep, and this huge storm came up. And here's what happened. As soon, a fierce storm came up. High waves are breaking into the boat, and it began to fill with water. And remember that many of them were professional fishermen. They'd been on the sea. They knew how to deal with this, and they couldn't deal with this. They couldn't bail or sail their way out of this. They were just in trouble, and the ship was going down, and Jesus was sleeping. And it says Jesus was sleeping at the back of the boat with his head on a cushion, and the disciples woke him up shouting, "Teacher," look at that, "don't you care that we're going to drown?" By the way, isn't that always fun to be awakened by shouting? How fun for Jesus. It's like, whoa, abrupt. And they shout this message of, you don't care. That's what this is about. You don't care. Have you ever felt in your life like God doesn't care? Yeah. Rembrandt drew a picture of what that moment must have been like, and I love the picture. And if you know what happens next, he stands up, and with 3 words, he ends the storm. He stands up and he says, "Silence, be still," or in some of your translations, "Peace, be still," and everything is done. He wasn't scared of the storm. They were never in any danger. But then in this incredible Jesus moment, he turns to his disciples and he asks them two questions. Why are you afraid, and do you still have no faith? Do you still have no faith in what? Not in what? In who? Right. Do you still have no faith in me? Because you're scared and believing bad things about me. Do you literally have no faith in me? That I'm powerful and that I care about you? Why is it so easy for us to be just like the disciples and believe bad things about God when bad things happen? Why is it so easy? I don't know the answer to that question. But the reason why I listen to that podcast almost every day of my life now for the last 3 weeks, why I've listened to it so many times, why I have no plans to stop. Every day when I get in the car, it's the first thing I listen to for the first 10 minutes of my drive. Every day when I drive to work, I listen to it. And the reason is because this. I never want to believe anything bad about God ever again. I never want to believe anything bad about God ever again. And I know that there are storms coming, and so I want to lock this truth into my mind. So if you're okay with this next part, as you can tell, this is really fresh in my mind. I'm only just learning about this. I'm going to tell you what I believe at this moment about how to apply this. But the reality is, 6 months from now, I'll know so much more about this. But if you're okay with me just telling you where I'm at right now, this is where I'm at. First thing is, make this your default response to bad news. Default response. We hear bad news, and those 6 words are the next thing in our mind. So bad news comes up, never believe anything bad about God. Immediately. Happened to me just recently. One of my daughters lives in this cute little house that they rent. I helped move them in a year ago, and I love this house. I mean, it is just it's a great financial deal. It's at a safe location in a big city, which is, for a dad, that's like, oh, okay, all right, they're safe, right? Whew, okay, and they can afford it, and it's really nice, and there's a potential to own it someday. As a matter of fact, just a short time ago, I was on the phone with that daughter saying, oh, I hope someday you can buy that house, and we were talking about it. And a short time after I spoke those words, she sent me a text saying, Dad, the homeowner is moving back to the city. We have to be out by December or January. It's the middle of October. And they have to go and find something new. Will it be as safe? Will it be as affordable? Well, all the things that dads worry about. It's like, oh. And the first thought in my mind when she texted me was, never believe anything bad about God. I didn't say that to her. I said it to myself as the dad, because I can be tempted to worry, right? I'm like, I'm not going to believe anything bad about you and this God. My default reaction, never believe anything bad about God. That's what I'm trying to wire my brain to do. I was really excited for one moment. It worked. Now, hopefully, as the time goes on, you'll hear me say that again and again. That's what I'm after. I want this to be a habit in my life. I will not believe bad things about God. This one I had a hard time writing. I don't know if this is the right way to word it, and I'll give you a second option here in a minute. Well, I'll give you it right now. One is kind of the negative turn of the phrase, and one's a little more positive. Don't let bad news turn into a bad God story. Don't let it become evidence that God is bad, is what I'm saying. But you can turn it around and make it a little more positive and say, tell good stories about God during difficult times. Either one, whichever one, hopefully one of those resonates a little bit more with you. But for me, that first one does. I don't want bad news to become a bad God story. And when you watch people struggle with their faith in life, this is what happens. Bad news happens, they tell a bad God story. It's evidence that God is bad. God is bad. If you ever read the Old Testament, you'll see so many examples of this. God, I remember when I was a high schooler and I was first starting to read my Bible for the first time, and I got to the story of Exodus. God says to Moses, deliver my people from Egypt, and he goes back and he does all these miracles, and God delivers the people from his people from Egypt, and they're on their way to this land he promised to give them. And every time they encounter anything bad, they immediately say that God is bad. Their default every time is not that this is a bad situation or that these are bad people, but that God is bad. Every time. Just one example from the book of Numbers. Why is the Lord, here's what they said, why is the Lord taking us to this country only to have us die in battle? Is that a bad thing to say about God? So here's what God is like. You want to know what God's like? He did all these plagues in Egypt to get Pharaoh to let us go. He brought us out of there. He gave us water along the way and fed us with food and meat. But now he brought us right here to the land just so he can squash us like a bug. Does that sound bad? Never believe anything bad about God. And because they could never get this concept, here's what happened to them. Because they believed bad things about God, their faith was always shattered the moment anything bad happened. They turned away from him quickly. And the real sad part of the story is they missed out on great things from God. There is nothing on that slide that I want for my future. And if I allow myself to believe bad things about God, my faith will be shattered. I will turn away from him, and I will miss out on the great things that God has for me. So I do want to ask you, are you starting to believe bad things about God? Are there thoughts in your mind today of that God doesn't care and my pain doesn't matter and he doesn't really love me and he's just kind of turned away from me? Or are you telling the kind of stories about God that are accurate according to what Jesus said? That he loves me with an absolutely indescribable love. And like the story he told, all he wants to do is restore me. And every need in my life matters to him. And he's at work in this somehow. Don't let a bad situation turn into a bad God story. The one that I think is challenging me the most is this last one. Act as if it was true. Act as if it was true. So let me explain it this way. Another quote from Dallas Willard was, we don't believe something by merely saying that we believe it. We believe something when we act as if it was true. So that's the quote that's like, okay, how do I act as if this was true? So in other words, if God is a good father, as good as Jesus said he is, if he's really that father in the prodigal son story, full of grace, full of mercy, full of love, who only wants to embrace us, be with us, walk through life with us, restore us when we fall, even when the mistake is 100% our fault, if that is really who he is, then how should I respond in the middle of this bad situation I'm dealing with? And what should I expect from God in the middle of this? And what might God want me to do now? So those are the questions that I'm wondering about. I stumbled on some notes this last week from another hero of my faith. Many of you, you're like, oh, not again, Brian. Yes, George Mueller. So George Mueller is one of the heroes of the faith for me. And he lived his faith out. He never believed bad things about God, even in the middle of bad circumstances that were terrifying. Care for 10,000 children with no income. You might be a little scared once in a while. That's what he did in the 1800s. No government support, no way to have his needs provided. He just trusted in God. And he said that real faith in those moments is manifested by prayer. And not only just prayer, he said that we should pray and expect to see God's blessing. So if it's true, if the Father is the way Jesus described, then my response should always be, in difficulty, I run to him. I pray and I expect to see the blessing of God even in the middle of it. I think one of the reasons why this has all hit me so hard is something I've talked about on one other occasion. Many of you know that my mom is dying of Alzheimer's. And she's another one of I don't have a lot of heroes in the faith, but my mom is one of them. My mom became a Christian shortly before I did, and so much of what I learned about Jesus, I learned because she was learning it, and then she'd come tell me. And so I've been a follower of Jesus for 40 years of my life now, and so she has helped me 1,000 times in that time. And now I'm watching just pieces of her just go away, and it's the hardest pain I've ever been through in my entire life, by far. And I think that part of the reason why this has impacted me so much is because he doesn't want me to believe anything bad about him in the middle of this pain. So when I think about how does he want me to act, if everything that Jesus said about the Father is true, I think this is what he wants to hear from me and what he does hear from me. God, I don't know what this means. I don't know why it's happening, but I know it has nothing to do with how much you love me. It has nothing to do with the fact that I am your child and I refuse to believe anything bad about you. So a couple of things as we finish up today. It is critical that you sort out what you believe about God. It's just critical. You have to think through the list on the back and identify if any of these are present in your life. Have you started to believe bad things about God? Because if you have, you will not pursue him. You see any of those negative beliefs? And really ask the question, how's your faith doing today? Is it growing? Is it strong? Is it developing? Or is it kind of stuck? And when it gets stuck, is it because you've begun to believe bad things about God? I really want to ask you to think about this. Are you willing to make this commitment along with me? That for the rest of the time that I have on earth, I will not believe anything bad about God. That's my commitment. Are you willing to say that? To say that you will never believe anything bad about God, no matter what tests come your way, no matter what trials come your way, no matter how this world plays out, I'm not going to believe anything bad about God. People do bad. There's bad in our world. But God is never bad. And I want you to think about this one. What if Jesus' description of the Father is 100% accurate? Do you then pray with this expectation of seeing God bless you? Is that how you pray? Even in the middle of suffering and pain and difficulty, is there this prayer of expectation because you believe what Jesus said is true? Let me have you bow your heads. Some of you are going through really, really tough things right now, and they are difficult, and you are in pain, and this is hard. And I think for some of you, this is the next step in your spiritual journey, is to learn this and make a commitment to this, that from this day forward, you will never believe anything bad about God. It's not that you deny that there's bad in this world, not at all. But that you're going to cling to the picture of who God is that Jesus gave us. This Father who only wants us and wants to embrace us and love us and restore us. Now, some of you, we talk about this opportunity to be a child of God. It is an opportunity. You have to decide. Because he offers every human being the same opportunity. You can be his child, his son or daughter forever if you want it. But you have to make a decision to receive it. And maybe you've never made that conscious decision to accept his gift. And he just loves you. The reason why Jesus came was to give his life on a cross for all the things that you and I have done in this world that are unloving. He paid our debt. And if you will let Jesus Christ forgive you, he will put you in his family forever. The Father will, in the New Testament, the word is adopt you. It's adoption. Because he wants you, just as you are. And if you want his adoption, just say something like this in your heart to him. He'll hear your prayer. Say, Jesus, I'm turning to you today. I want to be adopted by you. I want to be your child. Jesus, I've heard that you gave your life for me. So with the faith that I have, I turn to you now. Please give me this gift. In Jesus' name, amen. Thank you so much for taking the time to watch this service today. We hope as a church and pray that this was something that really helps connect you deeper to Jesus. That's what we're all about as a church. If you need to communicate with us, if you go online to penuelchurchlife.com, in the upper right-hand corner is a box that says, I said yes to Jesus. It also says, please pray for me. Just click on that, and it'll take you to a place where you can communicate with us as a church. So if you ever want any of the resources we mentioned in a service, go there and let us know. We'll gladly send them to you. Or if you made a decision to say yes to Jesus or you have a prayer request, just let us know. And we're always glad to hear from the people who are watching online. And if we can continue to help you grow in your faith in any way, then we want to do that. So again, thank you. And our prayer is that you continue to grow and connect and find the true life that Jesus Christ is offering.